In the harbors of northwestern Europe, from Ostend to Kiel, an extraordinary sight greeted observers in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. Thousands upon thousands of small gray vessels lay moored in silent, orderly rows. These were Britain's fleet of commando landing craft, the wooden boats that had carried raiders to every contested shore from the frozen fjords of Norway to the tropical beaches of Burma. After years of relentless service, they now bobbed idly in the sudden peace that had descended upon Europe. The concentration of these vessels was remarkable. At Portsmouth alone, more than 300 landing craft assault and landing craft personnel vessels crowded into the naval dockyard. At Felixstowe, another 200 awaited inspection. Throughout Scottish locks and Irish harbors, hundreds more rested after their years of continuous operations. These craft, numbering over 4,000 vessels of various types in British service by the war's end, represented the largest amphibious fleet ever assembled by any nation in history. Yet the peace that these vessels had helped to win would prove far less kind to them than the war itself had been. Within mere months of victory, a vast disposal operation began that would see the majority of these craft eliminated from existence. The very characteristics that had made these vessels invaluable during wartime operations now rendered most of them obsolete in peacetime. Their shallow draft, their wooden construction, and their highly specialized design had been perfect for amphibious assaults, but proved ill-suited to the post-war world. A peculiar competition emerged amongst the victorious powers, though not of the kind that might have been expected. Unlike the scramble to capture German jet aircraft or rocket technology, no foreign power coveted these British wooden assault boats. Instead, the competition centered on determining which allied nations might receive them as military aid, and which would face the breaker's yard. What followed would shape the fate of an entire class of naval vessel, one whose contribution to victory remained undeniable, but whose survival would prove remarkably precarious. At the war's conclusion, the Royal Navy found itself in possession of an extraordinary assortment of landing craft. The inventory included approximately 1,200 landing craft assault, the small armored boats designed to carry 35 troops directly onto hostile beaches, another 800 landing craft personnel, capable of transporting nearly 200 men each, filled harbor anchorages across Britain, 600 landing craft mechanized, designed specifically to deliver tanks and vehicles, lay in various states of repair. Among these were roughly 300 landing craft support variants, fitted with rockets, mortars, and cannon to provide covering fire during amphibious operations. The condition of these vessels varied dramatically across the fleet. Many craft showed extensive battle damage accumulated during operations at Normandy, throughout the Mediterranean theater, and in Pacific campaigns. At Gosport, naval surveyors made a troubling discovery. 40% of the inspected landing craft assault required major hull repairs. Their wooden planking had been splintered by machine gun fire or weakened by years of exposure to corrosive salt water. The vessels constructed in the early war years of 1942 and 1943 showed particularly advanced deterioration, with their hulls suffering from rot despite whatever wartime maintenance had been possible under operational conditions. However, not all the craft were in poor condition. Others remained in excellent shape, particularly those constructed in late 1944 for operations that never materialized due to the war's end. This created a mixed picture that complicated disposal decisions. The Admiralty faced an immediate logistical challenge beyond simple inventory management. These thousands of craft occupied berths desperately needed for the merchant fleet's reconversion to peacetime service. Britain's economy depended on rapidly restoring its commercial shipping capacity, and the landing craft were blocking vital harbor space. Beyond these practical concerns lay a strategic debate that would determine the future of British amphibious capability. Some naval planners advocated retaining a substantial amphibious force, pointing to Britain's continuing global commitments and its numerous island territories that might require military support. Others argued forcefully for wholesale disposal, citing the enormous costs of maintenance and storage for vessels that might never see combat again. The wooden construction that had allowed rapid wartime production now proved a distinct liability, as the craft deteriorated far more quickly than steel vessels would have done. By June of 1945, the Admiralty reached a decision that would seal the fate of thousands of these boats. The British approach to their own landing craft fleet proved methodical, systematic, and utterly unsentimental. Unlike the international scramble to secure German jet aircraft or rocket technology, no foreign power showed interest in acquiring these wooden assault boats for technological study. The Royal Navy established disposal centers at Portsmouth, Chatham, and Rosyth, where classification teams systematically assessed each vessel to determine its fate. Craft deemed suitable for further service received thorough overhauls at facilities including Vosper's Yard at Portsmouth and J. Samuel White's works on the Isle of Wight. The Admiralty selected approximately 400 landing craft for retention in active service, primarily the newer landing craft, mechanized, and landing craft personnel built during 1944 and 1945. These vessels underwent comprehensive refits that included installation of new engines, updated radial equipment, and improved crew accommodations to meet peacetime standards. The Royal Marines retained 140 landing craft assault for training purposes, dispersing them amongst bases at Eastney, Deal, and Poole. Another 60 landing craft assault went to Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve units scattered around Britain's coast, where they would serve to train the Navy's reserve forces. Meanwhile, Britain's program of military assistance to Allied nations provided an outlet for craft that were too good to scrap but surplus to Royal Navy requirements. Between July of 1945 and March of 1946, the Admiralty transferred 230 landing craft to European allies. The Royal Netherlands Navy received 48 landing craft assault and 32 landing craft personnel for operations in the East Indies, where Dutch forces were attempting to reassert colonial control in the chaotic post-war situation. The Greek Navy accepted 56 landing craft of various types in September of 1945, delivering them to Salamis Naval Base for use in the ongoing Greek Civil War. Belgium received 24 landing craft personnel in November of 1945, though most would see little active service in the small Belgian military. The process moved with remarkable speed, driven by the urgent need to clear harbor space and reduce mounting maintenance costs. By the end of 1945, more than 600 British landing craft had been either retained for active service, transferred to allies, or earmarked for preservation. However, the fate awaiting the remaining 3,000 craft would prove far less forgiving. In August of 1945, the Admiralty issued Directive ADM 175/45, establishing systematic disposal procedures for the unwanted vessels. The document specified that all wooden landing craft over 3 years old, unless specifically selected for preservation, must be disposed of within 18 months. The urgency stemmed partly from practical concerns about deterioration and storage costs, but also from Britain's desperate need for foreign currency and raw materials in its bankrupt post-war economy. Even the scrap value of fittings, engines, and metal components represented precious resources to a nation facing severe economic hardship. Disposal operations began at sites including Invergordon, where 340 landing craft arrived for breaking between September and December of 1945. The process proved extremely labor-intensive. Workers stripped out engines, electrical systems, and any reusable components before burning the wooden hulls. At Sheerness, another disposal center, processed 260 craft by March of 1946. The larger landing craft, mechanized, with their substantial diesel engines and steel ramps, yielded enough scrap metal to justify careful dismantling and salvage operations. The smaller landing craft assault, built almost entirely of wood with minimal metal components, were simply towed to remote beaches and burned. Along the coast of Scotland, more than 100 landing craft assault met this fate at locations including Luce Bay and Campbelltown. Witnesses described the burning as thoroughly efficient, with the mahogany planking and steel frames consumed in intense fires that lasted for hours, reducing the vessels to ashes and twisted metal. Some craft served as target practice before their final disposal. At Shoeburyness, the Army's artillery school used 43 landing craft personnel as targets for testing new anti-tank weapons. During trials in late 1945, the Royal Air Force employed 28 landing craft assault as targets for air-to-ground rocket tests at Tain Range in Scotland. By mid-1946, the disposal operation accelerated dramatically as winter approached. The cost of maintaining unwanted craft through winter storms proved prohibitive for a cash-strapped government. At Pembroke Dock, surveyors condemned 190 landing craft in a single week in February of 1946, finding rot so extensive that many were deemed unsafe even for towing to breaking yards. These vessels were simply scuttled in deep water off the Welsh coast, sent to the bottom rather than risk them breaking apart during transit. The thorough elimination of Britain's landing craft fleet stood in stark contrast to the preservation efforts surrounding larger warships. Whilst the Admiralty carefully maintained battleships, cruisers, and destroyers in reserve fleets, the landing craft received no such consideration. The National Maritime Museum at Greenwich acquired a single landing craft assault, designated LCA 1387, in December of 1946. The Imperial War Museum expressed interest in preserving examples for future generations, but lacked storage facilities for such large objects. By 1947, the disposal operation reached its conclusion. Records indicate that of approximately 4,000 landing craft in British service at the war's end, roughly 3,600 had been broken up, burned, scuttled, or destroyed through various means. 400 remained in active Royal Navy service, with another 100 held in reserve. Foreign nations operated approximately 230 former British craft. Survival beyond this point depended largely on accident and neglect, rather than deliberate preservation efforts. In remote Scottish sea locks, several landing craft assault abandoned as unseaworthy gradually sank into the mud, their wooden hulls preserved by the cold, low-oxygen environment. One such vessel, rediscovered in Loch Fyne in 1994, proved sufficiently intact for archaeological documentation, providing valuable insights into construction techniques. The legacy of Britain's commando landing craft extends far beyond the handful of preserved examples scattered in museums today. The experience gained in wartime amphibious operations directly influenced the design of post-war landing craft and military doctrine. Yet the wartime vessels themselves vanished with remarkable speed, victims of their own success and the peculiar economics of post-war demobilization. The systematic disposal of Britain's commando landing craft fleet represents one of the most complete eliminations of a wartime vessel type in naval history, leaving barely a trace of the vast feats that once made victory possible.